Welcome to Strider Trees. Today we are talking about one of the things I see really frequently as a hazard. It's one of the things I encounter frequently, and I've seen lots of videos where this has gone wrong. And it is the process by which you make a safe cut when you're on a really lateral spar and trying to take a big piece. You know, there's potential for barber chair, there's potential for it to swing underneath and hit a target behind you. There's a lot of ways that can go wrong. So we're going to talk about how to make that happen safely and predictably. So this is the cross section of the log, and I'm going to talk about this as if this is where I'm going to make my cut. So you got to pretend that there's a whole bunch of brush, sticking out straight away from me, but this log is fairly perpendicular. Now, the natural kind of intuition thing to do is, okay, if I want it to fall straight down, people think I'll just make a small undercut, and then I'll come in and cut straight from the top. Now, the risk with that is if I come up with my undercut perfectly parallel the branch, then all of this is compression wood, and I'm cutting all the compression wood away. And as I approach the center, I'm actually multiplying the force on the compression, and I'm have more and more probability of a pinch. So you generally will only get away with a very small undercut if you come straight up from the bottom. Now you can then make a little bit of a face cut so that there's room for it to swing, but you don't necessarily have to, and you don't want to if you want the whole branch to land flat. The downside of that situation is that, like I said, it wants to pinch really hard. So as I come up, it's trying to pinch harder and harder because this smaller and smaller portion of wood is supporting the weight of the whole branch on it. Now, the alternative, and this is what I'm going to try to demonstrate here, is instead of taking a whole bunch of compression wood all straight off the bottom, I want to bring the angle of the saw over about 45 degrees, maybe even a little bit more. You don't want it to be vertical because now you have no ability to steer, but you want it a little bit at an angle here. When I do this, and I start taking compression wood, over here I'm taking compression wood, but up here I'm actually taking tension wood. So I'm able to remove a much larger percentage of the overall support without risking the pinch of the saw. If it does pinch, it also will tend to pinch down here, and I can a lot of times wiggle my saw out of it in the area where it's not quite as pinched. So for the undercut on this sort of long flat spar, I want to know which way the spar is supposed to swing. If I want the spar to drift a little bit to the left, then I'll make my face cut like this. Sometimes I'll make a face, sometimes I'll just undercut it. And if I want it to drift the other direction, well then I need to make my cut kind of at this angle from this way, because as the branch starts to drop, it'll swing over. So after I make my face cut that's at a fairly steep angle, I'm going to pull the saw out, come around, and make the back cut. Now, whether I make the back cut towards the base of the trunk or towards the rest of the canopy depends on whether or not I want the branch to swing or if I want it to drop flat. Okay, hold on. I know I just said something that those of you who know better will yell at me for, so let me clarify. When I talk about making my second cut past my initial undercut, so initial undercut and my second cut on the side of the piece that's falling away, there is a distinct risk of that piece grabbing my saw and pulling it away from me. That happens primarily when the piece that I'm cutting is small enough that I can actually overlap my top cut with my undercut. And that creates a little slot that will pinch the blade and pull my saw away almost every time. Now, when I'm cutting a really big spar that's super long, what I know is gonna happen is that the hinge itself is gonna tear away long before I overlap. And I'm counting on that because that's what will prevent my saw from getting caught. And the reason I only mention this technique at all, cutting on the falling piece side, is because it keeps that little lip from sticking out, catching the piece that's falling and making it fall tip down. So there is some slight advantage to that. If in doubt, make it line up or keep your saw on the piece that is staying, the piece that's on the tree. You can make your back cut to that side if you're worried about losing your saw. If you're not worried about the piece hinging over, then by all means make it match or bring it back. But if you need the piece to land flat and it's big and it's long and you're not going to cut enough to overlap your cuts, then you can make it cheat it a little bit past your initial cut and it'll drop away a little bit flatter. You got a little better chance of that happening. And if the piece is big, again, you're not going to have that little groove to catch the saw, so you should be okay. Of course, you should have a lanyard on your saw anyway, And so even if it catches it, you should be all right, but something to be aware of. If I want the branch to swing, I'll make that back cut towards the base of the canopy, towards myself, if I'm sitting back on the log, because that'll leave a little bit of a shelf and that'll tend to hang the branch up and it'll want to swing underneath. If I make that back cut just a little bit past my initial undercut, then what happens when it breaks, it'll want to just drop straight away because there's no shelf for it to ride on. That's important to know if you are trying to get branches to land flat. Again, when I'm going to the back cut, the other thing I have to think about is where am I cutting away first? So if I make a nice deep undercut like this, then where I've got a solid 30%, maybe a little bit more of the wood taken away, this is what I have left. So I've got this large band supporting the rest of this wood. If I come on top and I cut away the top part of that band first, I'm cutting all the tension wood away very fast. And even though there's compression wood here, that is going to tend to break and it's going to hold a little bit harder. And so you'll just want to be aware of that. You might get a little more violent shock. It might not let go quite about when you expect. If you come over here like this and you cut away the compression wood first, this becomes a pinch spot. That will pinch on you so fast. So, but at the same time, when it actually breaks, it'll tend to push away and there won't be any hangers on the bottom side to make the branch swing. So this, when you cut away bias towards the bottom with the back cut, that tends to make the branch land flatter and not hang up as much. So you kind of factor all those things in, decide how you want the branch to move, and then use the right combination of angles in order to get it to land where you want it to go. Generally, and as a general rule, I'm going to pick which side I want it to drift. That'll be the side where I make my undercut. So in this case, I want it to drift off to my left, your right. I'm gonna make my undercut at an angle. I'll probably cut away almost all the way to the middle. I'll come out and I'll be almost parallel, but I'll bias it a little bit towards the bottom because I want it to land flat. And so I'll come in, cut here, and then usually right before that starts to pinch, or right as it starts to pinch, that whole branch will just break away and land flat. It'll pop that. Now, the reason that holds for so long and lets you cut away so much of the wood is the same reason you run joists in a deck vertically, right? If I've got this long strip of wood, there's still compression being supported here and there's still tension being supported here, and I've got a long lever in order to support that, mostly in the direction of the load. If that hinge wood is this way, that's like having your joist board flat. It just wants to bend and flex and break. So if my hinge wood is really lateral, that is super weak and it doesn't support well, and therefore I need a lot thicker wood, and it'll pinch faster and it'll tear away with more wood in place. But because of that angle, because I've got actually more leverage in the direction of the load, that allows me to cut away more wood before the branch wants to break, and I can have a little bit more control over it when it does. I've got a couple of feet of this log out in front of me here, and I know it's gonna block it, but this is a great angle to show what I'm talking about. Like I said, the natural tendency is to come underneath and cut straight up to cut away that compression wood. This is where you'll end up getting pinched and you won't be able to cut away much wood. It's also harder to reach this way. It's less comfortable. If I'm on a bigger log, then I'm reaching way underneath and it makes it really tough to get that cut effectively. Instead, we're gonna come in at an angle and then make our back cut at an angle as well. So in this case, if I make this bottom cut here, this log is gonna drift a little bit off to the right, and that's what we want. So I also am going to try and get it to pop off and land flat, so I'm going to make my back cut a little bit forward of my undercut. Here we go. Oh, I should mention, generally and in best practice, if at all possible, you should have a tying point. Sometimes I'll tie myself into 2 different trees so I can be nice and stable, to avoid having to have my lanyard around the tree underneath me, because there's always some risk of barber chair. I've never had any sort of barber chair peeling anything happen with this cut when I've done it right, but there's always some risk and you want to avoid that if possible, and you don't necessarily want to be tied to this spar if you can avoid it. Like I said, I'm showing the worst case scenario here. If you can, tie off somewhere else. Okay, here we go. Big undercut. If that had any weight to it, it would have just popped off, without any persuasion. So I have a philosophy that generally fewer cuts is less exposure to myself potentially getting injured by my chainsaw or cut out of the tree by my chainsaw. So I tend to work on the principle that the fewer the cuts that I can make, the better, the safer I'm gonna be. This is somewhat true, and that's why I'm talking about how to take a big piece safely. But if you aren't comfortable, if you aren't confident, if you haven't practiced this, it's often better, safer for another individual to just take more smaller pieces. If you're well tied in, if you can get good secure footing, you can make all those cuts safely, and a smaller cut's gonna be less consequential. So if you are able to get out farther on the branch and make a smaller cut, the movements will be less dramatic, you're less likely to have the scary pinch, you're gonna be able to free yourself if you do get pinched. So this is one of the circumstances where often more smaller cuts can be safer than one big cut, even if it's possible. Do what is safest for you, do what makes you comfortable. Don't try any of this without someone very experienced nearby to help coach you through. If you want to learn more about tree climbing, detailed tips and tricks, want to learn more about marketing, I just did a webinar on that recently. Leave your email on my website, stridertrees.com, and you'll be the first ones to know about any promotions, any new videos coming out. I would love to share all that with you, but thanks for joining me. Climb safe out there. Catch you next time.